did on the activist side. The companion paper to Joe's, if you go to the Troy Public Library website and look under local history, ours are the only documents under that, and you'll see PDFs of it, so you can read all the detail you want there. The cover picture, by the way, is by Rudy Wendelin, who did our illustrations when I was dealing with Contact US down in Virginia. He, by the way, is the guy who did most of the Smokey Bear illustrations for the Department of Interior. So that's a company I tried. Okay, the first picture here. I'm not going to go in detail into the history, but if you want to know any more about that, please ask during the question time. I'm just going to cover a few topics here. In the 1970s, and a large part of my young life, I was preoccupied with first the Hoosick Street Bridge, then alternate Route 7, then Crossgates. Of those three, we won one, which was Crossgates. But of course, the governor said, no, we don't care what happened in the environmental administrative hearings, we're going to build Crossgates. With the bridges and Alt 7, you don't even get that far. As Joe mentioned, the project proponents do the EIS, they have the money, they're going to build those projects. Anything you say is not going to make much difference. But having that experience, what I did was in my own mind try to go back and say, how did we get into the situation where these things were inevitable, no matter how bad an idea they were? And this is a picture taken about 1973 that included my critique of the first EIS, of which this is an actual real copy, right here, 1972 that came out. And at the time I was trying to make an aesthetic argument and saying, look, this beautiful view up the Hudson here, that's going to be covered over by this dark-looking bridge arching over there. Well, in fact, I was never very interested in the aesthetics, and what I've come to think of in this picture now is it really represents a potential that you can't see that makes what happened inevitable. And in geography, a potential is created by a whole number of things that go on in locations around. Troy, for instance, is a potential that fed on itself. As people came to Troy, it became a center of commerce and population, and it grew. The same thing happens with the highway network. So, if you knew what was going on way over on your left there, that was Maplewood Interchange Joe talked about, and over on your right is Hoosick Street, Route 7, and those create the potential for connection. And this is what State DOT, or in those days Department of Public Works, knew and would pursue. Next slide, please. This is an article from '75, and it's basically a recollection by one of the shop owners on Lower Hoosick Street, which is now no longer there, saying basically the neighborhood had been declining for about 10 years. Well, if you remember what Joe said, from 1975, count back 10 years, that is when people knew that bridge was coming. I maintain that any decline you saw in Troy around that time was the result of a pre-announcement that that area would be demolished, either by the urban renewal projects or a highway project. What I saw was no inherent decline of neighborhoods. I saw a lot of good housing go to lower uses, and I was living in one of those houses on A Street just a year before it was taken. But the myth that Troy was declining and had to be demolished is just that, a myth. Next slide. What brought these projects about, in terms of highways, goes back to at least 1939. I'll give a few key dates here. This picture is from a 1939 report by the Bureau of Public Roads called Free Roads and Toll Roads. And the label there, if you can read it, says, a decadent area fringing a city business section. This is part of the whole argument by highway engineers, mind you, and primarily T.H. McDonald, head of BPR, who came out of Iowa. And it contains basically an anti-urban bias. Part of it's racial. What's decadent about this picture? Well, if you look at that, those are black people on the sidewalk. Okay? And this is the kind of city you don't see in the country. So it must be bad. And his theory was that, well, because there's traffic in the downtown, you have to reform cities to accommodate that traffic. And that's pretty much the logical chain that leads all the way up into what we went through in the 60s and 70s. Next slide, please. This is one of the sequence of maps that just leads to that potential I talked about of that river crossing. This is from the 1955 Yellow Book, compiled by the Bureau of Public Roads at the time. This is a detail of what the plan was for interstates in the urban area. So you see down in the lower left there, that is the state thruway already built. You then have 787 going up from that, and note that the Hoosick Street Bridge is already there. You know, anybody that could look ahead saw that pointing at them. And then you know why Lower Hoosick Street was declining at that time. Not to mention North-South Arterial, which accounted for all the East Street corridor. You have your Northway, of course, which was built, and then the loop around Schenectady as well, and what eventually became the extension of I-90. Okay, but this is just one in a long sequence. I can go back to 1934. Harold Ickes in his diary mentions that FDR put together a sketch map with something like 3 east-west highways and 4 north-south highways that was the nominal basis of the interstate system. So we're talking the New Deal here. In 1938, another map was drawn. This one survives in the archives and was given to the Bureau of Public Roads, which became one of the bases of the 1939 report I mentioned. In 1938, there was also a Highway Act that required the Bureau of Public Roads to come up with a system of national transcontinental freeways that would actually be 3 east-west, 3 north-south. By 1944, we have legislation that specified the system pretty much that came out of connecting all the cities of 50,000 or over. 1947, a map exists of that national system, and then we come to 1955 that filled in the urban detail. So all this is going on basically from 1939 on that made what happened in Troy inevitable. Next slide. So we come late to the picture, and here's an example of my Urbanist newsletter where you can see I was starting to talk about the EIS that we were criticizing at the time. Next picture, please. And here's the overall sketch. So you see what was connecting across that potential. Maplewood Interchange was there begging connection across the river. Maplewood Interchange begging that connection on alternate Route 7 up to the Northway. Once that's in place, the potential occurs for everything else to connect. Next, please. Something I want to touch on is the relationship of the bridge to the Uncle Sam Mall, which was a major hope for commercial revitalization in Troy at the time. What I point out is that this was a sketch map in the first EIS, and what it does is it totally misrepresents the spatial relationship of the Hoosick Street Bridge relative to the Green Island Bridge and its feeding to downtown. The way this is shown, that distance from the top of what would be the Uncle Sam Mall area to the Hoosick Street Bridge is actually half of what it is on a properly scaled map. So it makes it look like the Hoosick Street Bridge is serving the downtown, whereas in fact, if you would use the Green Island Bridge as your major connection to 787, that would be a much better solution to that problem. But after all, they were both kind of fallacies, trying to remake downtown Troy into a suburban look-alike and feed it with so much traffic that couldn't actually be accommodated in the downtown. Next, please. Now, the Uncle Sam Mall project by itself reformed the downtown, and not in a good way. Next slide. So this is a base map that's circa, I'd say 1963, showing the downtown as it used to be, as I remember it when I got here, and as it's still commercially viable until 1974 when they simply tore it all down. But the great virtue of this road layout, and where's the pointer on it? Okay. The 100% corner, commercially speaking, is right there, Fulton Street and River. The configuration of that, if you don't remember, is kind of like what occurs at Monument Square. What's interesting is a triangular relationship that brings these streets all together in an active square. The first night I was in Troy, after arriving at RPI in 1966, there was a mob of teenagers all hanging around it. I mean, you can't believe how active Troy was, unless you remember it. Many of you probably do. But what happened with the Uncle Sam Mall, of course, is this configuration was eliminated, and what we have is that chunky block that's across the street now that's basically turning its back to the rest of the city. So there were things going on in the configuration of the local street system that were bad in terms of Detroit commerce, but the strategic idea that what this needed was an interstate highway to bring suburban traffic downtown was just a complete fallacy. Next, please. And this is one of the graphs we did at the time, circa 1973, just to show that, look, the effect of building this interstate system was just going to make it faster to get to the regional shopping centers in the suburbs that were already developing. So what you had actually going on at the time was what I call a major catastrophe in the regional configuration. What used to be 3 commercial centers, Troy, Albany, Schenectady, suddenly transformed into one regional center where the interstates intersected. You had your Colony Mall, and that was eventually replaced by Crossgates, where you had a new regional shopping center to replace what had been 3 urban centers in the region. And that is a very significant change. Next, please. This is a statement that particularly roused me as a system engineer, and it's basically an argument for segmentation of these projects. It's a statement by the then head of DOT, Hennessy, that said, nah, alternate Route 7 is not related at all to Hoosick Street. We build one and, that's all we have to look at. And of course, once we had completed the lawsuit for Hoosick Street Bridge, what happened? Within a year, we're getting the EIS for alternate 7. So I went on to fight that. Next, please. Bridge built in 1980. This is the announcement of it. Next, please. And last. And this is what we had, this great claw coming over into Troy that took out a great part of the downtown market and population. Why did downtown fail? Why is Troy less than it is? Why do we have a tax-based problem? This is it, right? Thank you.